My Aunt Phyllis used to say that we were descended from the famous Boston Warren family. This would have been through her mother, who was born Mayella Warren. And the most famous of all these Boston Warrens, of course, was Dr. General Joseph Warren, who died at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And Phyllis used to say that her sisters and herself, they were all eligible to become members of the Daughters of the American Revolution.
My mother said General Joseph Warren was one of I used to tell that at school. Yeah. And she always said, if you ever wanted to belong to the organization, the Daughters of the Revolution.
I bought into this idea as a kid, an 8th grader. I remember writing a report about a famous ancestor. I cited Dr. General Joseph Warren as my famous ancestor. But with a little bit of genealogical sleuthing, you very quickly run into the unfortunate fact that there is no verifiable connection between our family and the Boston Warrens. On various census records, in the archives, on death certificates, you find that Samuel Warren, who was Mayella's grandfather, lists New York and then Virginia as his birthplace. So there is no Boston connection. John Ginty was the first to debunk this myth about 25 years ago. And lately, as I've gone through these records, hoping against hope that there would be some sort of connection, there it is again, New York and Virginia. So there is no connection to the famous Boston Warren family. But it does beg the question, who were these Warrens? In October of 1889, Sarah Warren paid $275 for a lot of land in what was then known as the Calvary Cemetery. On Lot 14, she and her husband, a prosperous liquor merchant named Samuel Warren, erected an obelisk of dark granite. Here they gathered their dead. In all, Samuel and Sarah welcomed 16 children into their family between 1853 and 1875. The first wave of children did rather well, growing into adulthood without complication. But around the time the Civil War ended, the Warren children began to die at a young age. The twins, Margaret and Emma, as babies in 1868, Charles at a month old in 1871, Richard and Arthur as toddlers in 1875. In those days, infant mortality was a regular occurrence, and none of Samuel Warren's wealth could do anything to change that. Sarah Kendrick and Samuel Warren stepped from obscurity into the historical record in 1853 when they married in Boston. It was a first marriage for both. He was a 21 or 22-year-old mariner who identified his birthplace as New York and his father as Samuel, both of which are likely to be fabrications. She was a 19 or 20-year-old Irish immigrant, a daughter of John Kendrick and Sarah Kelly. We're on our own here with regard to their meeting, but it's certainly plausible that Samuel, a mariner or a boatman or trader, as he would later describe himself, set up housekeeping near the wharves where they would spend all their married life. The Fort Hill area was a mecca for the famine Irish, who settled in an area that had once been one of Boston's most fashionable residential districts, but was then transitioning into a more commercial district. In October of 1860, Sarah would deliver her fifth child, a boy, James Wilbur, who may have carried the same middle name as his father, Samuel W., and who would grow up known as Wilbur. The family was living then at 122 Purchase Street, not far from the wharves, and just down the street from this handsome home at the corner of Purchase and Congress. Sarah and Samuel had 4 older children, John, Marietta, Samuel, and Sarah, all of whom were living at the time the census was taken in August. Things were looking up for the Warrens on the eve of the Civil War. At the age of 29, Samuel had already made good as a self-described boatman. We're not exactly sure what a boatman did. In Old England, a boatman was someone who let boats for hire, or managed a boat, or who repaired boats. Whatever he was doing, he was making good money, enough to afford an 18-year-old live-in servant. Where most of Samuel's neighbors in 1860 claimed a personal estate of about $20, Samuel had $900. He owned real estate worth $400, which sounds paltry by today's standards, but most of his near neighbors own nothing. In a review of 30 pages of census extracts, only 2 neighbors have real estate holdings greater than Samuel's. His neighbors were laborers, painters, salesmen, porters, and seamstresses. Despite his relative wealth, Samuel and Sarah did not and would not ever live anywhere but that part of Boston where he made his living. Prior to the Irish potato famine, Boston's well-to-do built fashionable residences on and about Fort Hill, one of 3 hills dominating the landscape of Old Boston. But the 80-foot drumlin's proximity to the wharves undid the gentility of the old district, as Irish immigrants clustered about its base. Presumably, Samuel Warren met the Irish immigrant Sarah Kendrick here. By 1855, they'd settled at 122 Purchase in a building on a 2,100 square foot lot owned by the heirs of Nathaniel Parker. Parker's lot backed up against a lot fronting the once stately Washington Square. Sometime between 1870 and 1872, the Warrens moved temporarily to 123 Purchase, across the street and up some distance from their old lot. Why? The move probably had something to do with the excavation of Fort Hill. By the time of the Civil War, Fort Hill was an undesirable area, filled with tenements and shanties, drunkards, and crime. Between 1866 and 1872, the city excavated the old hill to create a level, 20-acre lot that would satisfy the warehouse demands of Boston's growing commercial district. Some of this landfill would form the foundation of Atlantic Avenue. In 2013, the land occupied by One International Place at the corner of Purchase and Oliver Street is likely to be where the Warrens lived between 1855 and 1870. On an Indian summer evening in early November of 1872, a fire kindled in the basement of a dry goods building at Summer and Kingston Streets. It was 7 p.m. on a Saturday evening. The fire quickly flared out of control despite the efforts of Boston's fire chief, John Demrell. Within 20 hours, the fire consumed 65 acres of Boston's wholesale district, including a good deal of Purchase Street. The conflagration was so overwhelming that the great walls of the mercantile buildings would tumble in relative silence. They came down, Oliver Wendell Holmes remarked to his father, as if they had fallen on a vast featherbed. Only one brief reference to the fire escapes the memories of relatives close to the Warrens who lived through that devastating night. Warren B. Dannenberg, a grandson of Marietta Warren, said his father told him his mother's family's real estate survived the Great Fire. That's the only reference to the Warrens in the fire we have. By the time of the Great Fire, the Warrens had moved off Purchase Street to 401 Broad Street, very close to the railroad depot of the Boston, Hartford, and Erie line. Today, South Station occupies this old parcel. Between 10 p.m. and midnight that Saturday, the fire consumed a block of boarding houses along Bedford Street and then turned the corner onto Broad Street. What were the Warrens doing then? Richard was just 2 months old, Agnes was 3, Henrietta was 4, Kate was 5, William was 7, Wilbur was 13. It was a house full of kids and teenagers, 11 in all. They must have fled their house by 10 o'clock.
By 2 o'clock, the fire raged fiercely. Every few minutes, a greater body of flame announcing the destruction of a new building. It was simply fearful. The streets, bright as day. Harriet Putnam, 1872.
Explosions resounded across the city as advocates of gunpowder blew up buildings trying to stop the fire's spread. Business owners manned the roofs of their buildings, dousing the sparks as they jumped from roof to roof. Refugees from the flames carried goods to safe havens, the poor trundling beds, chairs, bundles, and crockery, rugs, cook stoves, washboards, one woman with a plaster statue of the Virgin Mary, the cinders falling all around them. Those cinders rained down on the depot near the Warren home, lighting coal sheds along the wharves. The dry wooden station went up in flames. The fire jumped onto the dockside vessels, storing fish and ship stores, and consumed it. In a photograph taken after the fire, 2 wooden wharf sheds at the depot escaped the flames. Maybe the Warren home did too. One of the Dannenbergs says his grandmother's family's real estate escaped the flames. Maybe they got lucky. Few in that district were. The flames leveled buildings and businesses and created an apocalyptic cityscape of a place that had been home to the Warrens for 20 years.
The streets of the burned district are so filled with granite, marble, and brick, piled in chaotic confusion, and there is such a wilderness of broken walls and chimneys, that we have been lost amid the ruins. Charles Carlton Coffin, 1872.
It felt like winter everywhere except for Summer Street. There the flames were all anybody anywhere could see. And from the top of Beacon Hill, we watched the fire spill over Water Street. Started quickly, the flames in a shootout on a city street, jumping roof to roof like they were running from a robbery. And everywhere you turn, another building burned. Now it's all debris. Everybody knows where they were the night the fire came. And everybody found who they were the night the fire came and swallowed me whole. So with our backs on Broad Street, the captain told us all we had to hold the line. But the horses were laid up in bed, and the engines couldn't make the climb. And so the word spread down the wire, the flames were getting higher here in Damrell's fire.
So I don't even know. I just woke up in the street in this burned out district, and I look around and it's filled up with granites, marbles, bricks, stucco, like some woods, and it was piled in like, it was chaos because I was confused because all of a sudden I'm sitting in this this wilderness, you know, and I look around, I'm like, oh, I'm not in a wilderness because there's like a broken wall and there's a chimney. And I don't know, I must have been lost or something because I was ruined. I think I was ruined because I got wasted the night before.
By 1875, the Warrens had moved from the fringes of the burnt district to a new home at 55 Long Wharf, where they would live for the rest of Samuel and Sarah's lives. Long Wharf at this time had ceased to exist as the half-mile extension from Faneuil Hall into the harbor, as shown in this lithograph by Paul Revere. In the 18th century, the wharf was home to the famous American portrait painter John Singleton Copley, who grew up on the pier, where his mother ran a tobacco shop. By the time the Warrens moved onto the wharf, it was a stub of its former self, as the city of Boston, bit by bit, reclaimed land from the sea for its swelling waterfront. In the 1880 census, the oldest Warren child, John, was working as a plumber. Samuel was a submarine diver. These were the men who drove the wooden pier pilings along the waterfront up and down the coast. Wilbur had adopted his father's profession and described himself as a boatman. Marietta had married Charles Dannenberg from Louisiana, and they were all living at Long Wharf. The question is, where on Long Wharf? The Custom House block was built in 1848, and it very well may be that the Warrens, living then at number 55, lived in a portion of the Custom House block. We do know that number 66 was in the Custom House block, so maybe 55 was too. If not there, then perhaps in the neighboring building. Both buildings survive to the present day. From the mid-1870s on, Samuel began identifying his birthplace as Richmond, Virginia. And so maybe that is his story. He was a rebel who came north, as one of his descendants, Edna Warren Tenney, once put it. He came north, he married an Irish immigrant, who never learned to read or write, but he did well, raising 9 children into adulthood. No pictures of Samuel or Sarah survive to this day. We do have a picture of one of their children, Sarah Warren, who married Jim Dennehy, and there is a picture of some of the Warren grandchildren, including Mayella Warren. But Samuel and Sarah are lost to us. Some of the family lore says that when they died, they left all of their money to their daughters. No one knows why. Sarah died in 1900, and Samuel, around that time, developed problems with his kidneys. Fluid swelled beneath his skin, and he died eventually of edema. Research into Samuel's birth turns up no birth record in Richmond, Virginia, in the early 1830s. It may be that his history will remain buried with him. No doubt the rumors of association with General Warren will persist. Indeed, Warren Dannenberg said his grandmother's middle name, Bayman, references a French officer on the staff of General Lafayette during the American Revolution. Maybe there is something to this. The family lore says that the Warrens are part of the same family that founded Mass General Hospital. That family was a part of General Warren's wider family, so maybe there is a connection. After all, the family lore was right about the Warrens' family connection to